The fires of the heart. In a small village tucked within the valleys of a vast and lonely kingdom, there was a young woman named Avellini. She was the daughter of a once proud merchant, a man who had prospered through hard work and good fortune. But when Avellini was still a child, tragedy struck. Her father fell ill and, after a long and painful sickness, he passed away. The merchant's wealth, which once glimmered like gold beneath the sun, was now in the hands of his second wife, Celeste, a woman of cruel ambition and cold manners. Avellini's world, which had once been filled with warmth and love, turned icy the moment her mother died, leaving her at the mercy of her stepmother. Celeste, a woman of sharp eyes and sharper words, was quick to show Avellini that she was no more than a servant in the house. Her daughter, Seraphine, was spoiled and selfish, always quick to criticize Avellini for her plain appearance and humble nature. The two women treated Avellini with disdain, often sending her to do the most menial tasks while they enjoyed the comforts of a well-kept home. It was not the physical labor that hurt Avellini the most, but the constant verbal cruelty. Celeste would mock her for her quiet demeanor, saying, "Why do you waste my food? You're nothing more than a shadow in my house." Seraphine would sneer, "You'll never be good enough for anyone. You're just a servant just like your mother was." One evening, after an especially harsh reprimand for something she had not done, Avellini sat alone in the corner of the dark, cold kitchen. Her heart ached with sorrow, and for the first time in years, she felt the bitter weight of loneliness pressing down on her chest. But as she sat there, something within her stirred. The last shred of hope flickered. She could no longer bear this life. She could not stay under the roof of these people who had no kindness for her. That night, when the house had fallen silent and the moon hung high in the sky, Avellini packed a small bundle of belongings, only a worn woolen shawl, a slice of bread, and a small pouch of coins. Quietly, she slipped from the house and into the night. The streets of winter. The cold bite of winter gnawed at her skin as she fled through the darkened woods and into the village. She had nowhere to go, no friends to turn to. The world outside the house felt immense and indifferent, and she was just another girl with nothing to her name. Avellini wandered aimlessly, the weight of the night pressing down on her. Her feet were frozen by the time she found a small, abandoned barn near the edge of the village. She crept inside, shivering from both the cold and fear. There, she huddled in a corner, clutching her shawl tightly around her shoulders, her breath clouding the air. That night, the winds howled, and the snow began to fall in heavy, silent sheets. As Avellini sat there, trying to stave off the cold, she heard a faint whimpering sound. At first, she thought it was the wind, but then the sound came again, soft, pitiful, and desperate. Avellini turned her head. In the far corner of the barn, beneath a pile of straw, she saw a small, trembling form. She crawled toward it cautiously and found a puppy, no older than a few weeks, shivering in the cold, its fur matted with ice and dirt. Its tiny body quivered with the chill, and its eyes, wide with fear, looked up at Avellini. Without thinking, Avellini scooped the little creature into her arms, her heart breaking for the helpless thing. She gently rubbed the puppy's fur, trying to warm it, though her own body was numb with cold. "It's all right," she whispered softly. "I won't leave you here. You're safe now." The puppy, weak and hungry, licked her hand before curling up against her chest. Avellini held it close, letting its warmth soothe her own. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel so alone. Struggling to survive. Days turned into weeks, and Avellini and the puppy, whom she named Aspen, survived as best as they could. The streets were harsh, and hunger was a constant companion. Avellini begged for food at the market, offering whatever few coins she had left, but the villagers were either too suspicious or too afraid to help. They had their own struggles, their own burdens to bear. Aspen, though small, had a fierce loyalty to Avellini. The puppy followed her everywhere, curling up beside her at night, protecting her in ways no one else ever had. But the days grew colder, and Avellini felt the strain of her new life. She began to wonder if she would survive the winter, and if Aspen would, too. Then, one bitterly cold morning, as Avellini walked with Aspen in search of food, they encountered a man, an old man with a long, graying beard and a tattered cloak. His face was weathered and his hands cracked and calloused from years of living on the streets. He looked at Avellini with eyes full of understanding. "Not much out here for a young one like you," the old man said, his voice raspy but kind. "You and your pup look like you've been out in the cold too long." Avellini nodded, her lips numb, unsure of what to say. She had learned not to trust easily, but something in the old man's voice told her that he wasn't like the others who had turned their backs on her. "I'm Callum," the man said, as if sensing her hesitation. "I've been living on the streets for more years than I care to count. If you want to survive out here, I can teach you how." Avellini hesitated, but the thought of surviving alone in the bitter cold made her decision for her. "Please," she said softly. "I don't know how much longer we can make it." Callum nodded, a glimmer of sympathy in his eyes. "I'll show you the ways of the streets, where to find shelter, what to eat, how to stay warm. You've got to stay smart, girl. The world's a cold place, but it don't have to break you." Over the weeks that followed, Callum became a mentor to Avellini. He taught her how to forage for food, how to build a fire with just a few twigs and dry leaves, how to navigate the harsh realities of life on the streets. Aspen grew stronger, and so did Avellini. They learned to rely on each other, finding a kind of strength in their bond. A new dawn. One day, just as winter was beginning to wane, a letter arrived for Avellini. It was addressed to her in the familiar hand of her father's solicitor, a letter she had never expected to receive. She tore it open with trembling hands and read the contents. "My dearest Avellini, it is with great sorrow that I write to you after so many years of silence. I wish to inform you that your father, in his final days, made a will. Upon his death, all his wealth, his property, and his belongings were left to you. You were his sole heir. Your stepmother, Celeste, and her daughter, Seraphine, have no claim to his estate. You are the rightful owner of all he left behind." Avellini's heart raced as she continued reading, but the words were clear: her father had left her everything. The mansion, the lands, the fortune. It was all hers. Her stepmother had no right to it. With a mixture of disbelief and hope, Avellini sought out the solicitor who had written the letter. She arrived at the village hall, where she was greeted with astonishment and disbelief by those who had once ignored her. It was soon made clear that Celeste and Seraphine had been living off her father's wealth, squandering it without a care, while Avellini had been left destitute and abandoned. But now, with her father's will in hand, the situation was about to change. The village turned its eyes on Celeste, and the truth of her cruelty came to light. She was cast out of the estate, her claim to the wealth severed. Seraphine, who had always been spoiled, was left with nothing. As for Avellini, she returned to the house she had once fled, but now with the power to make it her own. The mansion was no longer a prison, but a home, one that was hers by right. She did not return to the life she had before, but rather, she built a new life, one filled with kindness, warmth, and love. Aspen, now a strong and loyal dog, remained by her side, her faithful companion through all the trials and triumphs. And Callum, the old man who had taught her how to survive, was taken in and cared for, his wisdom and kindness cherished in the new life Avellini had created. With the fires of her heart rekindled, Avellini knew she had found her place in the world. And in the quiet corners of her home, as she watched the sun set over the horizon, she smiled, no longer a shadow, but a woman who had overcome the cold and the darkness, to find a life that was truly her own.